There's a lot of Final Fantasies. Like a whole lot. On top of the 16 numbered entries, there are over 75 spin-offs using the Final Fantasy name or characters. But in that giant pool of spin-offs, there are a few that meet all the arbitrary criteria of quality, budget, and originality to be upgraded to a main series numbered entry. Final Fantasy Type 0. This one released as a PSP exclusive in Japan in 2011 and wasn't officially translated to English until the HD version released in 2015. You play as a team of 15 students at a weird military school, fight in violent battles, and grapple with weird gaps in your memory. The premise is pretty similar to Final Fantasy VIII, but in execution it's a very unique experience. If they had the good sense to release this as a numbered Final Fantasy, it would have been number 14. It was announced as Final Fantasy Agito 13 at the same time as another game called Final Fantasy Versus 13. Both were apparently intended to be spin-offs of the real FF13, just without any connection of any kind to that game. Versus 13 actually did become a numbered entry, eventually releasing as Final Fantasy 15. Agito 13 became Type 0, and it matches the main series perfectly in terms of scope and quality. It even calls back some of the lost elements from earlier in the series, like running around on a world map. The only reason I can imagine for withholding the number is because it was a handheld game, and clearly PSP was winding down considering they didn't even bother to localize it for an international release. But it deserves a place in any series playthrough as the honorary Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. Going from a game that wasn't released in the US to one that was specifically designed for it. Mystic Quest was designed as a simpler, beginner-friendly RPG for Western audiences that had only played half the Final Fantasy series by 1992. It was pretty harshly judged on that premise alone, but the game itself is fantastic. There's less menuing required, but it's still a full-scope Final Fantasy with a world to explore, memorable characters, dungeons, and challenging battles. Mystic Quest had a reputation as what you'd call a baby game, an easy game for babies. But it's a lengthy quest that's right on par with the difficulty of the rest of the series. It also has one of the best soundtracks in the series. It released in Japan as Final Fantasy USA, but I argue it should have been released as Final Fantasy V. Final Fantasy III in the US. This numbering gets so complicated. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. This game was a big deal for the GameCube back in 2004. The first Final Fantasy to release on a Nintendo system since Square jumped ship to PlayStation. It was not quite what the fans were expecting though. An action RPG built around a local multiplayer experience. And there was a time when that might have been enough to say it couldn't be a numbered Final Fantasy. And that time was before Final Fantasy XI. All bets were off at this point. Final Fantasy could essentially be anything now. Crystal Chronicles was both very new for the series, but also a throwback to the best elements of classic 8-bit Final Fantasy. The established characters and lengthy dialogue scenes of the modern series were thrown out in favor of a squad of player-made characters on a single unifying quest through a well-realized world. FF9 may have billed itself as a throwback to the series' roots, but Crystal Chronicles is the game that really nailed the essence of Final Fantasy, and it should be called Final Fantasy XII. Oh, and another all-time great soundtrack. Stranger of Paradise, Final Fantasy Origin. Okay, now we're really getting into it. This is the first entry on the list that was not developed by Square. Stranger of Paradise was a 2002 action game by Team Ninja. It could be loosely described as Dark Souls meets FF1, but that doesn't begin to do this game justice. Honestly, I think this one deserves a number because it's one of the best games in the series. And it seems wrong to have a Final Fantasy game this good and not part of the main series. I think this one got written off pretty early after its original trailer because its presentation is kind of a misdirect.
I'm here to kill chaos. I want to kill chaos. We're here to kill chaos. Chaos.
The overly macho lead character and repetitive dialogue all turn out to be important elements of what turns out to be one of the best stories in the series. It spends a long time looking like total nonsense, but when it starts to come together, it's shockingly good. The gameplay is clearly Dark Souls inspired, but weaves in FF elements like a party and a well-realized job system, and the end result feels like Final Fantasy through and through. This one kinda breaks the rules because of its connection to Final Fantasy 1, but I don't care. It should have been called Final Fantasy 16. Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. It's 2001. Final Fantasy is at the height of its cultural importance, and Final Fantasy X is a movie you go to the theater to see. That's the next one. And why wouldn't it be? It's written and directed by Hironobu Sakaguchi, the guy that directed Final Fantasy 1 through 5, and wrote the stories for nearly all of the games at this point. He created the franchise and had a hand in every entry. He was Final Fantasy Hideo Kojima, and if he says it's Final Fantasy, then by God, it's Final Fantasy. It's commonly argued that the movie is too different from the games. But is it really that much more of a departure thematically than Final Fantasy VII was when that released? This is a series that reinvents itself every time, and the arbitrary limits set by the fans are always changing. Also, this movie is seriously underrated.
That is a tasty plasma. Maybe I could sneak in and watch Final Fantasy Spirits Within. I don't care what anybody says, that's one of the best sci-fi films ever made.
It should be Final Fantasy X. In making a list like this, all we're really talking about is changing the titles of these games. Does it really make that big of a difference? I still frequently see fans opining that they wish FF11 and FF14, the MMOs, weren't numbered entries. Why couldn't they just call them Final Fantasy Online? Well, I can only speak for myself, but if those games weren't numbered main series Final Fantasies, I never would have played them. And I certainly wouldn't still be playing them every Wednesday and Thursday on Twitch. If the 2001 movie was called Final Fantasy X, it wouldn't be a forgotten footnote in series history. It would be an essential part of its legacy. It's possible to forget about spin-offs, but you cannot forget a numbered Final Fantasy.